James "Big Shag" Thompson slowed his car as the traffic light turned red. The evening rain had just stopped, leaving the city streets shining under the streetlights. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, tired but happy after running. His weekly basketball clinic for kids from the local community center. As he waited for the light to change, something caught his eye. A man sat huddled in the doorway of what used to be a corner shop. The shop had closed down months ago, its windows now covered with faded "For Lease" signs. The man wore an old jacket that had seen better days. Next to him was a small cardboard sign that James couldn't read from his car. James wasn't sure why this particular homeless person caught his attention. Maybe it was the way the man sat, back straight, head up, looking out at the world with dignity despite his situation. There was something familiar about him. The light turned green, but instead of driving on, James pulled his car over to the curb. He didn't know what he was doing, just that he needed a closer look. He stepped out into the damp evening air, the smell of rain still fresh on the pavement. "Evening," James said as he approached. The man looked up, squinting slightly in the dim light. James felt his heart skip a beat. Those eyes, he knew those eyes. "Thomas?" James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas Wilson?" The homeless man stared at him for a long moment. His face was thinner than James remembered, with a grey beard that hadn't been there before. Deep lines marked his forehead and the corners of his eyes. But those eyes, they were the same kind eyes that had watched over James when he was just a scared 20-year-old rookie trying to make it in professional basketball. "My goodness," the man finally said, his voice rough from lack of use. "Little." "James Thompson, is that really you?" No one had called James little anything in years. At 6'9", he towered over most people. But Thomas had always called him that, back when James was the youngest player on the team and Thomas was the equipment manager who kept everything running smoothly. "It's me, Thomas," James said, feeling a lump form in his throat. What are you doing here?" Thomas looked away, shame crossing his face. "Life takes some strange turns, son." James knelt down despite the wet pavement soaking through his expensive jeans. "Thomas, you were the one who believed in me when no one else did. You stayed late to help me practice. You made sure I ate proper meals when I was too nervous to eat. You can't be out here like this." Thomas had been more than just the equipment manager. He had been the heart of the team. The man who knew everyone's shoe size, their favorite snacks, their worries and fears. He remembered birthdays and anniversaries. He gave quiet words of encouragement when the coach was shouting. For James, far from home and family for the first time, Thomas had been like a second father. "I've had some bad luck," Thomas said simply. "It happens." James stood up suddenly, extending his hand down to Thomas. "Come on, let's get you something to eat and talk about this." Thomas hesitated. "I don't want charity, James, especially not from you. I'm proud of what you've become, but—" "This isn't charity," James cut in. "This is me repaying a debt. Do you know how many times you saved me from giving up? How many times your words kept me going when I wanted to quit and go home? Please, Thomas, let me help." A small group of people had stopped to watch the tall, famous basketball player talking to a homeless man. James didn't care. All he could see was the man who had once picked him up when he was down. Slowly, Thomas reached up and took James's hand. His grip was still strong, his palm still calloused from years of handling equipment. James helped him to his feet. "Just dinner," Thomas said. "It's for old time's sake." "Just dinner," James agreed, though in his heart he had already decided much more. As they walked toward his car, James placed a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Do you remember what you used to tell me after I'd missed shot after shot in practice?" Thomas gave a small smile, the first James had seen. "Tomorrow's a new day, little James. Tomorrow's always a new day." James nodded as he opened the car door for his old friend. "Well, Thomas, tomorrow's starting right now." As they drove away from the curb, leaving the empty doorway and cardboard sign behind, James made a silent promise. He would not fail this man who had never failed him. Thomas had been there at the beginning of James's journey. Now James would be there for Thomas's new beginning. The small diner on Baker Street stayed open late. Its windows glowed warm against the dark night. Inside, James sat across from Thomas in a quiet corner booth. The vinyl seats squeaked whenever they moved. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air. Thomas looked out of place in his worn clothes. His hands shook slightly as he picked up the menu. James pretended not to notice. "Order whatever you want," James said. "I'm starving after that clinic." Thomas nodded, but still chose one of the cheapest items. Only after James insisted did he add a bowl of soup and some tea. When the food arrived, Thomas ate slowly at first, then with growing hunger. James waited patiently. He knew Thomas would talk when he was ready. "This is the first hot meal I've had in weeks," Thomas finally said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me," James said. "But I would like to understand what happened. Last I heard you were still with the team." Thomas stared into his tea for a long moment. The steam rose in curls around his tired face. "I was there for 15 years, he began. "Loved every minute of it. Then Emma got sick." James remembered Emma, Thomas's wife. She had baked cookies for the team on holidays. Her laugh could fill a room. "Cancer," Thomas said, his voice dropping. "Started in her breast, spread to her bones. The doctors tried everything." James nodded. He had lost touch with Thomas after being traded to another team. He hadn't known about Emma's illness. "The medical bills came fast," Thomas continued. "Our insurance covered some, but not all. We spent our savings, sold the car. I took extra shifts, worked nights, but it wasn't enough." Thomas paused to sip his tea. His hands were steadier now. "After she passed, I wasn't thinking straight. A friend of a friend had this investment opportunity. Said it couldn't miss." Thomas shook his head. "Put in what little we had left. 2 weeks later, the whole thing collapsed. Turned out to be a scam." James felt anger rising in him. "Did they catch the guy?" "He's in jail now. But the money's gone." Thomas shrugged. "Then I lost my job with the team. New management came in, wanted younger staff, said I was too old-fashioned." "That's not right," James said firmly. "You knew more about basketball than anyone there." "Maybe. So, but that's business." Thomas took another bite of his food. Couldn't keep up with the rent after that, lost the house, found a small flat for a while, but then that went too. Been on the street about 8 months now. James tried to imagine Thomas, who had always been so proud and capable, sleeping in doorways and under bridges. It hurt his heart. "I pick up work when I can," Thomas said. "Cleaning, mostly. But not many people want to hire a man my age. Especially one with no fixed address." "Why didn't you call me?" James asked, leaning forward. "You had my number. I would have helped in a heartbeat." Thomas looked down at his hands. They were worn and rough, with small cuts across the knuckles. Hands that had worked hard all his life. "Didn't want to be a burden," he said quietly. "You were building your career, had your own family to worry about." "Thomas, you were family to me," James said. "When I was a rookie, scared and lonely, you were the one who looked out for me. Remember when I missed that game-winning shot against Detroit? I was ready to quit basketball altogether." A small smile touched Thomas's lips. "You were quite dramatic." "Back then, I was," James agreed. "And you sat with me in that empty gym until midnight, rebounding my shots, telling me to keep my elbow in." "You had talent," Thomas said simply. "Just needed confidence." "What I needed was someone who believed in me," James corrected him. "That was you, Thomas. You were there for me when I was nobody. Let me be here for you now." Thomas looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He nodded once, unable to speak. After they finished eating, James drove Thomas to a decent hotel nearby. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe. James paid for a month up front. "This is too much," Thomas protested weakly at the front desk. "This is just the beginning," James told him. "I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to figure this out together." In the hotel room, Thomas sat on the edge of the bed. He ran his hand over the clean sheets. The room had a small TV, a desk, and a bathroom with a proper shower. Simple things that had become luxuries to him. "Get some rest," James said. "Things will look better in the morning." After James left, Thomas took a long, hot shower. He washed, away months of struggling on the streets. When he finally lay down on the soft bed, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. For the first time since Emma died, Thomas didn't fall asleep wondering where he would be tomorrow. For the first time in 8 months, he didn't feel alone in the world, and as sleep came to him warm and gentle, Thomas allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his life wasn't over yet. Thomas woke up in his hotel room to the sound of knocking. For a moment he forgot where he was. The clean sheets and soft pillows felt strange after months of sleeping rough. Then he remembered. James had found him. James had helped him. "Coming," he called, his voice still rough with sleep. When he opened the door, James stood there with 2 shopping bags and a paper cup of tea. "Hope I didn't wake you," James said, stepping into the room. "I brought some things." Over the next few days, this became their pattern. James would arrive with something new, clothes that actually fit, proper shoes to replace Thomas's worn-out trainers, a warm coat for the cold evenings. But more than these things, James brought time. He sat with Thomas, talked with him, listened to him. Thomas had forgotten what it was like to be heard, to be seen as a person, not just a problem. "Your knee still giving you trouble?" Thomas asked one day, noticing James's slight limp. James looked surprised. "You remember that old injury?" "Of course I do," Thomas said. 2012 playoffs. You landed wrong after that dunk against Chicago. Doctor said to rest it, but you insisted on playing." James shook his head, smiling. "You remember more about my career than I do." "I kept track of all you boys," Thomas admitted, "even after I couldn't be there in person." One afternoon, they sat in a small cafe near the hotel. Thomas looked different now. His beard was neatly trimmed, his clothes clean and fitting properly. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, but something was still missing from his face. Purpose. "You know," James said, watching Thomas stir his tea, "you understand basketball operations better than most coaches I've known." Thomas smiled sadly. "Always loved the game. Never good enough to play professionally, but I found my way to be part of it." James nodded, thinking. After lunch, he dropped Thomas back at the hotel with a promise to return the next day. That evening, James made a phone call to his old friend William. They had played together years ago before William retired and opened several sports training facilities across the city. James explained Thomas's situation, his background, his knowledge of the game. "Bring him by tomorrow," William said. "Let's meet." The next morning, James picked up Thomas, who noticed they weren't heading toward their usual cafe. "Where are we going?" Thomas asked. "To meet a friend," James replied with a smile. They pulled up outside a large building with a sign reading, "East Side Sports Academy." Inside, the familiar sounds of bouncing basketballs and squeaking trainers filled the air. Thomas's eyes lit up in a way James hadn't seen before. William met them in the main office. He was shorter than James, but had the solid build of someone who still kept in shape. He shook Thomas's hand firmly. "James has told me all about you," William said. "I understand you know a thing or two about basketball." "I've been around the game a while," Thomas said modestly. William led them on a tour of the facility. There were 4 full courts, weight rooms, classrooms, and offices. Children of all ages practiced under the watchful eyes of coaches. "We run programs all year round," William explained. "After-school sessions, weekend leagues, summer camps, kids from 8 to 18. Thomas watched a young boy struggle with his dribbling technique. Without thinking, he took a step forward, then caught himself and stepped back. William noticed. "You wanted to help him, didn't you?" Thomas nodded. "His hand position is throwing off his control. Small adjustment would make a big difference." William smiled. "That's exactly what we need here, someone who sees those details." They continued the tour, ending in William's office. William leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "We need someone who knows basketball inside and out," he said seriously. "Someone who can connect with the kids and teach them not just skills but heart." Thomas looked down at his hands. "It's been a while since I've worked with anyone. Not sure if I'm the right person anymore." James put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "So you were the best part of my early career, Thomas. These kids deserve someone like you in their corner." William nodded in agreement. "The position is Youth Basketball Coordinator. You'd oversee our coaches, develop training programs, work directly with the kids who need extra attention. There's accommodation included. A small flat above the facility. Nothing fancy, but it's yours as part of the job." Thomas stood very still, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "I don't have proper references," he said quietly. "No recent work history." "James is your reference," William replied, "and he's the best one anyone could ask for." Thomas looked around the office, then out the window to the courts where children played. For the first time in years, he could see a future for himself. "When would you want me to start?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How about right now?" William said, holding out his hand. "That young boy still needs help with his dribbling." Tears welled in Thomas's eyes as he shook William's hand. "I don't know how to thank you both," he whispered. James smiled. "You already taught me everything about gratitude, Thomas. I'm just following your example." That afternoon, Thomas walked onto the basketball court for the first time in years. He approached the young boy who was still struggling. The boy looked up, frustrated and ready to quit. "May I?" Thomas asked gently, holding out his hand for the ball. The boy handed it over. Thomas demonstrated slowly, explaining each movement. "Try now," he said, giving the ball back. The boy tried again, adjusting his hands as Thomas had shown him. The ball bounced more smoothly. "I did it!" the boy exclaimed. "Yes, you did," Thomas said, smiling. "Now let's try it again." From the doorway, James and William watched. "Think he'll be all right?" William asked. James nodded, watching Thomas kneel down to eye level with the child. "He's home now. He's where he belongs." The basketball bounced with a steady rhythm across the polished floor. Thomas watched from the sidelines, clipboard in hand, as 20 children ran drills. 6 months had passed since he'd taken the job at Eastside Sports Academy. 6 months since his life had changed. "Coach Thomas," called a young voice. "Oh, watch this." "Not bad," Thomas said with a nod. "Now try it again, but keep your elbow tucked in." Oliver tried again. This time the ball sailed cleanly through the hoop. Oliver beamed at the success. He was a thin boy with serious eyes and quick hands. Something about him reminded Thomas of James at that age, raw talent mixed with deep hunger to prove himself. After practice, as the other children filed out to waiting parents, Oliver stayed behind to help collect the basketballs. "No rush today?" Thomas asked, noticing the boy taking his time. Oliver shrugged. "Mum's working late again. Said to wait here until she can pick me up." Thomas nodded, understanding more than the boy realized. He'd learned that Oliver lived with his mother, Margaret, in a small flat across town. She worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Basketball was Oliver's escape, his safe place. "While we wait, let's work on that jump shot," Thomas suggested. An hour later, Margaret rushed in, looking tired and worried. "I'm so sorry," she said to Thomas. "My shift ran late and then the bus was delayed." "No problem at all," Thomas assured her. "Oliver's been helping me." As they were leaving, Thomas noticed Margaret's worn coat and the way she counted out exact change for the bus fare from a nearly empty purse. He recognized the signs of someone barely keeping their head above water. The next day, Thomas knocked on William's office door. "Got a minute?" he asked. William welcomed him in. Thomas explained about Oliver and his mother, their situation reminding him of so many families he'd known over the years and of his own recent struggles. "Basketball keeps Oliver focused," Thomas explained, "but if they lose their flat, he'll have to leave the program." William listened thoughtfully. "What do you suggest?" "I'm not sure yet," Thomas admitted, "but I know we need to do something." That evening, Thomas called James and shared his concerns. 3 days later, the 3 men sat in William's office with a plan. "We're calling it the Family Support Fund," William explained, showing Thomas the draft proposal. "For program participants facing hardship. The plan included emergency housing assistance, job placement help for parents, and expanded scholarships. For children." Thomas read through it, his hands trembling slightly. "This could help so many families," he said quietly. "It was your idea," James reminded him. "We're just putting the structure around it." At the next staff meeting, Thomas stood before the coaches and administrators. 6 months ago, he'd been too ashamed to ask for help himself. Now he spoke with confidence about helping others. "We're not just teaching basketball," he explained. "We're teaching life, and sometimes life knocks you down." The room fell silent as Thomas shared his own story for the first time with his colleagues. His years with the professional team, losing his wife, the financial troubles, and eventually the streets. "I was lucky," he said. "Someone reached out when I was down. Not everyone gets that chance." The program launched the following week. Margaret was one of the first parents they helped, connecting her with a better-paying office job at one of James's business partners. The temporary housing assistance helped her catch up on rent until her new job's paycheck started. Word spread quickly. More families came forward, not just for help, but also to volunteer and give back. Parents who received assistance returned to help other families once they were back on their feet. One evening, Thomas found Oliver sitting alone on the bleachers after everyone else had left. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked, sitting beside him. "Better than okay," Oliver said. "Mum's not worried all the time anymore. She even laughs now." Thomas nodded, understanding the weight a child carries when they see their parents struggling. "You? No," Thomas said, bouncing a ball slowly. "You've got real talent. I've been watching you improve these past months." Oliver caught the ball. "You think I could be like James one day? Play professionally?" "Maybe," Thomas said honestly. "But talent only takes you so far. It's heart that makes the difference." "What do you mean?" Oliver asked. "Heart is what keeps you practicing when everyone else has gone home. Heart is what helps you get back up when you fall. James had that heart. I see it in you too." Oliver thought about this, turning the ball in his hands. 3 months later, the academy held its first community event. The gymnasium was packed with families, local officials, and even a few reporters drawn by James's involvement. Tables displayed information about the Family Support Fund, which had already helped 15 families stay on their feet. Thomas stood nervously at the podium, looking out at the crowd. He spotted Margaret and Oliver sitting in the front row. James stood at the back, giving him an encouraging thumbs up. Thomas cleared his throat and began to speak. He talked about second chances and community, about seeing people, not problems. His voice shook at first, but grew stronger with each word. "6 months ago, I was homeless," he said simply. "Now I stand before you, not just as someone who was helped, but as someone who can help others." The room was completely silent. "Sometimes we fall," Thomas continued, his eyes finding Oliver in the crowd. "But with the right hand reaching out, we can always rise again." As he spoke these words, Thomas knew they were true. He had risen again, and now he was reaching back to help others do the same. The new building stood tall and proud on what had once been an empty lot. Fresh paint gleamed in the morning sunlight. A large sign above the entrance read, "Second Chance Sports Center." Below it, in smaller letters, "Where everyone deserves another shot." 1 year had passed since that rainy night when James Thompson spotted Thomas Wilson huddled in a doorway. Now both men stood before a crowd of nearly 200 people. The key. Mayor was there, local business owners, families from the community. Even some of James's teammates had come to show support. Thomas adjusted his tie nervously. He still wasn't used to being in the spotlight. He preferred working quietly in the background, helping others find their way. But today was different. Today was the opening of something bigger than himself. "Can you believe it?" James whispered beside him. "1 year ago you were—" Thomas nodded. He didn't need James to finish the sentence. 1 year ago, he had been homeless, hopeless, and alone. Now he stood on the verge of helping others who were walking the same hard path he had traveled. The idea for the Second Chance Sports Center had come to Thomas 6 months earlier. He had been working at Eastside Sports Academy, watching how basketball gave children confidence and purpose. One night, walking home, he had passed a homeless shelter. "What if," he had asked James over coffee the next day, "we could do the same thing for adults who have lost their way?" James had listened carefully. By the end of that meeting, he was making phone calls. By the end of the week, they had their first investors. By the end of the month, they had found the perfect building. Thomas turned to see 12-year-old Oliver attempting a tricky layup. The ball circled the rim twice before falling through the net. Now that building was complete. It housed basketball courts, classrooms, a small medical clinic and offices, where people could get help finding jobs and homes. Upstairs were temporary living spaces for those who needed a safe place to stay. The mayor stepped forward to cut the red ribbon stretched across the entrance. Cameras flashed, people clapped. The ribbon fell away and the Second Chance Sports Center was officially open. Inside, Thomas took his place at the small podium. His hands shook slightly as he looked out at all the faces watching him. Then he spotted Oliver and his mother, Margaret, in the front row. Margaret now worked as an administrator at the Eastside Sports Academy. Oliver gave Thomas a thumbs up, and suddenly the words came easily. "When I was at my lowest," Thomas began, his voice clear and strong, One person saw past my circumstances to who I really was. That's what we aim to do here. See the person, not the problem. He explained how the center would work, how people experiencing homelessness could come for basketball, stay for job training, health care, and support, how they could find not just help, but respect. A basketball court is a place where nothing matters except what you can do right now in this moment, Thomas said. Not your past, not your problems, just your potential. After the speeches, people moved through the building, exploring the Shag new facilities. Thomas found himself surrounded by well-wishers, shaking hands, answering questions. It felt strange to be the center of attention after so many years of being invisible on the streets. Across the room, a young woman with a notebook approached James. "Mr. Thompson? Lisa Bell from the City Times. Could I ask you a few questions?" James nodded politely. "You're known for your generosity," she said, "but this project seems particularly personal. Why this cause?" James looked across the room to where Thomas was showing Oliver a new shooting technique. The older man knelt down to the boy's level, patiently demonstrating the proper form. "We all fall down sometimes," James said simply. "The true measure of our community is how we help each other get back up." The reporter wrote quickly, then asked, "Some people say helping the homeless only encourages dependency. What would you say to that?" James shook his head. "Those people have never been down, really down. When you're at the bottom, you don't need judgment, you need a hand. And sometimes that hand is all it takes to remember who you really are." Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned, Thomas found a quiet moment with James. "I never properly thanked you," Thomas said, "for stopping that night, for seeing me." James put a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You thanked me by doing all this, by helping others." Thomas nodded. "Oliver asked me something interesting yesterday. He wanted to know if I was glad about everything." "That happened to me. The hard times, I mean." "What did you tell him?" James asked. "I told him I wasn't glad about the hard times," Thomas said. "But I was grateful for what they taught me, about strength, about kindness, about how quickly a life can change for worse or better." In the months that followed, the Second Chance program grew beyond what either man had imagined. People came, not just for help, but to volunteer. Former program participants returned to mentor newcomers. Thomas traveled to other cities, helping them set up similar centers. News stories featured Thomas's journey from homelessness to hope. Each time, he made sure the reporters understood that his story wasn't special. There were thousands like him, on the streets, people with skills, dreams, and worth, waiting for someone to see past their circumstances. Sometimes, late at night, Thomas would remember that rainy evening when he sat in a doorway with no hope for tomorrow. How quickly life had changed because one person had stopped, looked twice, and remembered kindness given long ago. One simple moment of recognition at a traffic light had grown into something that changed hundreds of lives. All because James had stopped his car and Thomas had found the courage to accept help. And in that simple truth lay the heart of their work. Sometimes the smallest moment of human connection can change everything.